Hi. Hi. Oh, maybe I'll put it over here. I'm just playing the inside of my mind while I'm setting up. Hi, I'm going to talk about just like an overview of my work, since I make in a lot of different disciplines or mediums, and yeah, lots of them aren't connected, but there are lots of overarching themes that I've seen now retrospectively after 5 years. So I guess I'll give you some sort of insight into what's going on, since I rarely talk about my work. I'm starting here. I 5 years ago had my first solo show at Bodega on Rivington Street, and a lot of the work at that time had to do with a lot of ancient Judaic apocalyptic literature. And so I kind of started looking at flood mythologies, and historically there's been flood mythology since Mesopotamia, since like the beginning of time. And it's interesting to see the ways in which religious figuration responds to and is created through apocalyptic thinking. And so I started to look into that. Here are just a few illustrations from the internet of different ways in which then flood would come, and certain deities or deities that came to destroy civilization to then save it through rain, or usually water. Water is always the cleansing source to overwrite the world and free it from sin, or to like resolve certain problems. So on this level, I started to make these currencies, and these were currencies that had been debased by the euro, or certain ancient forms that were either containing spices or pollen or goji berries, things that had been traded throughout time. And I recast them into a resin sand dollar that used to be traded in Phoenician times. And I called it crude currency. And I kind of, in the same way that Noah's Ark was, animals were saved 2 by 2, I recast the coins 2 by 2 to create this kind of like vault or archive of them, but also they became currency that I used to pay for the show. And I'll just read the full title. It says, crude currency: the real price of everything, what everything really costs to whom wants to acquire it, the toll and the trouble of acquiring it, what everything is really worth to whom has acquired it and wants to dispose of it, or exchange it for something else, the toil and trouble which it can save, which it can impose on other people. Moving on. Here are some other sculptural pieces. I usually recast found artifacts, or this is a basin that I attach claw feet to, and inside is this small horse that you can kind of see. And it's called Solastasia, which is this idea that it's kind of some sort of existential or greater distress about climate change. And so this kind of has some sort of drama of a ship made of ram horns being sunk into this, which you can't see, like oily black water that's hovering over this horse looking out. And this piece is called Energy Removal, Perishability of the Natural World. And I've been making recently kind of like techno dollhouses. Like I've been making my own containers that contain kind of smaller miniatures. I work often with miniatures, but this is kind of dealing with all these levels of perception, or ways in which usually these are the devices of perception, like the beam of a projection light and the staging of a theater. And when you stand from this piece, you're spotlit, and so it's like hard to look at. And there's also a level of plexiglass that's two-way, so when you look at yourself, you also see yourself, which you can experience in a photo. And I wanted to go through my book that I made over the last, I showed it, it came out from my last show at Bodega, but it contains 5 years of soup sculptures that I made. And I've been making small vignettes within a resin cast soup bowl. Soups have become my vessel of choice in kind of recasting American figuration, Americana, as a way of looking at what gets distilled into an object that then materially kind of outlives us, and kind of commemorates or becomes a fossil of what we want it to possess or intend it to possess. And I name them often after virtues. So I'm going to read the intro to the book as a way of narrating them. And this was written by Ruby Tendo, who's a food writer in London. Soup is pure matter. It exists to be transformed. What about the brutality of the killing, the plucking and harvesting that lands the ingredients in a heavy stock pot, or of drowning these ingredients in liquid? And then consider the flame that the pot is set over. Heat is a violent disruption, serving to break down the integrity of the building blocks of the soup. So carrots and onions soften and meld and become carrot onions broth. This joining is violent, and so soup, by its very essence, is brute, destructive physicality. It is stuff. Hold the stuff in your mouth, and it will wrap to your gums. Let it sink with gravity, and feel the warmth of it linger in your throat. Eventually, it cools to the temperature of blood. It acquiesces and draws into your cells. The body tears it apart to the finest shreds of substance, and these molecules subsume to the fabric of flesh, bone, and bile. You eat soup. Soup is eaten by you. It is to be taken in, undone, and used up. Eat. Make the soup become you. This brutality is incoherent with the tenderness that characterizes the home kitchen, and yet this duality, violence and nurturing, disruption and growth, is at the heart of the act of eating. And I also just wanted to point out I work with other forms of eating. This is a pig trough, so I like to also use things that animals eat from also to like decenter the human experience. So where was I? First, there's the artistry of the cook and the subjective, careful tactility with which she feels, tastes, and smells her food. The aim is not just sustenance, but pleasure. To share a recipe is an act of charity. To share a plate of food is a gesture of love. The metaphorical and folkloric weight of soup is well known. Chicken soup, hot borscht with sour cream, groundnut soup, minestrone. Each of this is rich with the promise of healing. And yet soup is also soylent. Soup is a smoothie bowl, bone broth, nutrient pouch, an intravenous drip, jars of baby food, energy bars, protein powder, caffeine pills, and breast milk. Soup is gasoline. Soup is a streamlining nutrition by recasting food as fuel. This is not food that resembles food, but substance minimized to condense pure energy. This is the other side of the duality of food. Food is both the physicality of brute substance and the transcendence of the metaphysical questions that override it. Soup is the essence of this conflicted food, reduced and distilled. And I want to pause on this sculpture. There's an essay in my book where this writer named Abraham Adams, he's created a space in Boston called Time Farm where he's kind of involving his meditation process into a space for art where you spend time looking at the work without a phone for 2 hours. And so he spent 2 hours with my work, this piece, and then he wrote an essay afterwards. And I just want to read some of the thoughts that he had that I thought were really interesting. He said, I look at the sculpture Thankfulness, and I see that it consists of a ceramic soup bowl containing what seems to be two plastic boys of apparently different provenance, fragments of different narratives. They are both in Hummel style, named for the Franciscan Maria Hummel, of whose sacred mid-century drawings of children various German manufacturers modeled their figurines. Hummel herself died of tuberculosis at the age of 37, and she died, no doubt, because of the squalid conditions of her convent, which were the result of the Third Reich, appropriating half the income in her art produced. The government allowed her to continue her drawings despite the Nazis' magazine's 1937 complaint that the figures were brainless sissies, unworthy of the fatherland. Given that sissy is a homophobic slur, I can conclude that the tenderness with which the boys seem to face off encrypts a kind of memorial to gay people persecuted by the Nazis and to the artists such as Hummel on which they perversely relied, even while antagonizing them. Looking at Thankfulness is not really about Nazis, but my interpretation is a story of a given navigation of the historical abyss that the Hummel's combination conjures for me. The experience of reading them is more of one of witnessing the entire abyss at once, something like looking at the ocean. And so I thought, or in thinking about using these figures that are often guided through some sort of like morality, a lot of these are like live in grandmother's windows or like always embodied with some sort of like Christian moral story, often to just, if you are to twerk them or to reorient them in the ways that I do, it kind of grasps this like the chaos that's also latent in the materiality that they possess. going into this. So I was also drawn to other forms of figuration that are outside of the lens of Americana, and I didn't grow up with the idea of angels, but I became interested in the figuration of angels throughout time, since their bodies have shifted throughout civilizations. They're written to be immaterial, and so in looking at altars or in looking at churches, the ways in which they are hyper-masculinized or militarized became really interesting to me. So this is one of the most famous, Michael the Archangel, who is this very emboldened white muscular man with a sword, and was necessary for the people at the time to have an avenger, and so he was rendered to avenge them in these ways. These are other examples of angels throughout time. In ancient Judaic literature, often they are more pagan-like. They have multiple heads. Sometimes they have animal heads. Sometimes they're just made of many fireballs with multiple eyeballs and many wings. So they've always served different purposes and were willed into a certain form. And then there's the recording angel. That's often in Christian literature. And the recording angel watches you all the time and writes down what it observes in a book, and the book becomes used for judgment later on. And I was thinking a lot about this book of judgment and big data and the ways in which both observe and track and then further judge you at some later point, and the poetic kind of like crossings of those things. And so I created this piece for my last show at Bodega. The show is called Entering Heaven Alive, and this piece is called Restraint and Support, and I was thinking a lot about the ways in which these technologies both observe and track and restrain you in some ways if you believe in them, especially through religious conviction, that then they set up an order in which you kind of like live your life, and that restraint gives you some sort of like way in which you kind of feel supported. And so within this window, I just used found angel figuration that were bound by wires, as if the wires in the wall had been exposed to kind of show the connections that are unseen, that are around us, that are constantly sending data on our behalf for us, that also power everything. This was also a small intervention of a sculpture I made called Service Destiny, where I just replaced the head of an angel with a mirror. And then this is a show I made in Italy at Veda. It's called The Living Watch Over the Living, and they're life-size glass marionettes. And one angel hovers above and it's shooting down a bird, and another angel's trying to catch it. And I think a lot of the times I'm interested in the ways that these forms both serve as a vessel, an observer, and a protection symbol simultaneous. And again, the bodies and the ways in which they're rendered to doing that and what that means.
Stefano Luciano. Wow.
Tutte e due, ormai.
Io ho fatto modello per le fare.
Certo.
I wonder if I had the other one. No. Okay, anyway. And then this show I just did in Tel Aviv, I think in June. It's called Yom Asal Yom Basal. It was the slogan, it was the saying I grew up with. It's Arabic for one day sweet, one day sour, when you're asked, how are you doing? And so that became the title of the show. And the show, I wanted to work a little more with abstraction, since it's not something I often do. Everything I do is often very figurative. And I also wanted to highlight the tethering of the wires that feed the light. And so they became elevated on these stands, but they also then cast this kind of abstract landscape, which I liked. And here's some more interior shots of it. This was a radio piece where I rewired 2 radios with this umbilical cord that it's hard to explain because, again, spatially it's much easier to witness, but one frequency was fed to another, so they kind of, their signals swap bodies, and one was connected to an Israeli station, and one was connected to a West Bank station because we were in Tel Aviv, and it was really interesting to see the ways in which they are in harmony and the ways in which, like, thinking about spatial borders and the ways in which, like, sonic borders are different and not as censored, and so there's a way that you can access both and how they can be connected. And there was this moment when I was setting it up where Stand By Me was playing on the Palestinian station and the Israeli news was on the other, and it was just very poignant to have kind of like, or feel the transgression of those boundaries through this sculpture that were really imminent, just like in experience and experiencing it in space. More glass work. And I think because I'm also so interested in light, I've been working with cyanotypes, which you just use sunlight to project an image. So this piece is called Fallen, Passing the Light to Lower Levels. And this last piece is called Repatriation of the Aura. Yeah, I guess this is where I'm kind of at right now, and I'm working on a show for Swiss Institute that's opening in a month. And I think I have like the thing. So it's opening on November 20th, and it's called Protect Me From What I Am. And with the show, I've been going to a bunch of factories in Italy that produce religious figuration to kind of like look into automated mass-made figuration on another scale. And through that, I've been collecting the bad batches, like the batches that don't get shown or seen, they get remelted. And thinking about what those look like and what they represent in terms of like the iconography of such an able-bodied rendering of what people pray to normally, and the bodies in which these icons or these like monolithic people have been throughout millennia, and then breaking that through what has been discarded as an unintended monument. Yeah, so that's it.
Thank you, Haley. Does anyone have any questions?
Haley, were those, you said that those glass angels are life size? Really? So they're like,
They're huge. Yeah. It was perilous. Like working with glass was like extremely stressful. Yeah.
they look like they're.
I know, photos are crazy.
And in the talent, you showed that the sculptures were lit. Can you talk a bit, like, was the gallery dark and you lit up? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, I think I'm often in spaces that are basements or don't have windows, so a lot of my work has started to glow. Like they're essentially lamps, they just have light bulbs and are plugged in. But I've just been creating my own light since I'm dealing with the context in which I'm given.
Just elaborate on this idea of the unintended monument.
Yeah, I mean, I think like looking in the histories of like monumentality, it's also the histories of erasure. And I've been thinking a lot about like monument removal now, because like a lot of these monuments we look at are so latent, like they possess so much violent colonial history, but we don't, but are also kind of like dormant, because we just don't learn about things and we're not acquainted with them on some sort of like historical, like everyday level. And I think that like in looking at these bad batches, there is some sort of like representative body that's there that's like just like interesting because it's been manipulated. A lot of them they look very like gastrointestinal. They have a lot of plastic that's been like squeezed and wrapped around them like tentacles. So it's kind of like a failed body or like a failing body in the ways in which they're so viscerally representative of some sort of organ or like inner part of a body. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting to resurrect or like bring to the fore in thinking about what isn't represented in religious figuration as a thing, as a thing that's supposed to save you or heal you. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.